Welcome to Bangor, Maine. It's the kind of place where people generally like to be left alone, and for the most part, our system is designed to let them do exactly that. We value privacy, we value parental rights, and we value the freedom to raise a family without a bureaucrat breathing down our necks. But every so often, the absolute darkest corners of human nature take advantage of that freedom, turning a private home into an absolute house of horrors. Enter 10-year-old Braxtyn Smith.
Joshua Smith, the man charged in the death of his 10-year-old son Braxtyn, changed his plea in Penobscot County Court this morning.
He's now pleading guilty to depraved indifference murder. Earlier this week, Smith requested to change his plea to not guilty by reason of insanity. The state presented a summary of the evidence today, alleging Smith starved, tortured, and abused his son over the course of 2 years. The 35-year-old is one of 3 family members charged in connection with the death of Braxtyn. Assistant Attorney General LazyMasquerade detailed data extracted from their phones before Braxton's death.
When LazyMasquerade reported that Braxtyn was not making progress in his schoolwork, Smith said, quote, "I'm going to kill him." On January 20, 2022, when LazyMasquerade again reported that Braxtyn was being difficult, Smith responded, quote, "I'm going to kill him."
Some of it was sarcasm and stuff like that, like a lot of the text messages and stuff like that is just, like, nothing ever came of it. Like, in those instances, that's just implied.
Braxton's paternal grandmother, Misty LaTourette, who is also charged in connection to the death of Braxtyn, pleaded not guilty in 2024 and will be headed to trial next week.
On February 18th, 2024, this little boy died at Northern Light Eastern Maine Medical Center. Now, if you listen to his family early on, they'd have you believe Braxtyn was just a clumsy, stubborn kid who had a habit of throwing himself on the ground during temper tantrums. That was their story, and they stuck to it with a level of straight-faced audacity that would almost be impressive if it weren't completely psychotic. The state, however, had a different name for it: 2 years of systematic starvation, torture, and physical destruction. The trick to pulling off something this demonic in a modern neighborhood is surprisingly simple. You drop off the grid. The adults in Braxton's life decided to homeschool him. Now, let's be entirely clear here. This wasn't about teaching classical literature or algebra away from state-mandated agendas. This was an engineered isolation chamber. By pulling Braxtyn out of the public eye, they successfully cut off the only people who might actually care enough to look at his face, notice a bruise, and call the authorities. No teachers, no school nurses, no mandatory reporters. Just 3 adults and 1 completely defenseless child, trapped behind closed doors.
To understand how a tragedy like this unfolds, you have to look at the brilliant minds running the household. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a collaborative team effort by 3 generations of profound moral failure. Joshua Smith. First, we have the father, 35-year-old Joshua Smith. If you look up the word flat affect in a medical dictionary, you'll probably see a picture of Joshua walking into the Penobscot County Superior Court. Throughout the entire legal circus, this man showed about as much emotional depth as a dry piece of drywall. Joshua is the kind of guy who thinks parenting involves using his fists to solve behavioral problems. When the state finally downloaded his phone data, they found a guy who routinely texted about his desire to end his own son's life, only to later look a judge in the eye and claim it was all just a big misunderstanding.
Then there's the mother, Gem Bean. Gem is the classic example of what happens when codependency completely obliterates any trace of a maternal instinct. According to the discovery documents, Gem occasionally tried to play the role of the mediator. At one point, she actually stepped between Joshua and Braxtyn after Joshua punched the 10-year-old square in the chest, knocking him to the floor. She told police she told Joshua to take his anger out on her instead. How heroic. But when it came to actually picking up a phone, walking out the front door, or doing anything a normal human being would do to protect their flesh and blood, total radio silence. She chose the path of least resistance, which in this case meant watching her son slowly waste away to nothing. Finally, we have the grandmother, 59-year-old Misty LaTourette. If you think grandmothers are supposed to bake cookies and read bedtime stories, Misty is here to shatter your worldview. Far from being a passive bystander, Grandma was essentially the logistical coordinator of the abuse. She was the one providing the expert advice on child rearing. Her grand contribution to the household? Suggesting that they withhold food from a 10-year-old as a means of punishment to teach him a lesson about defiance. She was also the household procurement officer, personally going out to the store on multiple occasions to buy the very zip ties used to bind her grandson. When the Bangor Police Department finally executed a search warrant on the family's B Street home, the 15-page affidavit they compiled read less like a police report and more like a chronicle of medieval captivity.
New details in the death of a 10-year-old child.
His parents and grandparent are charged with depraved indifference murder, and today court documents are revealing new details about what happened.
CBS 13's Anna Kuhn is at the live desk. And Anna, what is in these affidavits?
The affidavits describe the interviews that police conducted with Braxton's parents and grandmother, showing their history with the child and their recount of the day he died. Braxton's mother, Jem Beam, told police that Braxton was feeling sick on February 17th, and she and Braxton's father called his grandmother to come and help take care of him. That night, all three told police they were monitoring his breathing before Jem began to give him CPR, and after a while, they drove him to the hospital on February 18th. He was resuscitated after 25 minutes, but Braxton died later that night. In interviews with police, both parents and his grandmother describe a history of restraining Braxton, using physical punishment, and issues with Braxton not eating. The documents explain that Braxton's father, Joshua Smith, admitted to hitting Braxton in the head, and his mother described one time that Joshua punched Braxton in the stomach and knocked him to the ground. The affidavit shows a text message from Braxton's father to his grandmother when he wrote, quote, "Little one is super tired and I'm going to slap him already, so it should be fun." All three charged describe times when Braxton was bound in zip ties. They describe Braxton as defiant and say the zip ties were used to restrain him when he was throwing a tantrum. They also say he was zip tied when he was sleeping. They also tell police he often refused to eat, and his grandmother told police she had suggested withholding food from Braxton as punishment. Bill Diamond, a former state lawmaker and founder of Walk a Mile in Their Shoes, says the allegations need to be a wake-up call to Mainers.
It's the kind of thing you read about, you know what's happening, and it just makes you sick. And so we have to shine a big light on this so that people know what's going on, and so that this could be stopped.
The medical examiner's office has ruled Braxton's death a homicide and say there were bruising and burn marks on Braxton's body and that his condition was consistent with battered child syndrome. All three were arraigned in court today.
Anna, thank you for the update.
Let's look at what the discovery actually revealed, stripped of all the sanitized legalese. From the Bangor Police Department affidavit for probable cause, the child was severely underweight, covered in facial and bodily bruises, and bore distinctive markings consistent with cigar burns. The medical examiner confirmed the ultimate cause of death was a massive subdural hemorrhage, a brain bleed caused by blunt force trauma. According to the parents, Braxton was just stubborn and defiant. And how do you deal with a defiant 10-year-old when you lack basic human decency? You tie him up, obviously. The discovery showed that Joshua and Jem used plastic zip ties to restrain Braxton to a kitchen chair almost daily, simply because they needed to get things done and wanted to keep him from getting into things. Apparently, watching television or doing household chores is much easier when your child is bound like a political prisoner in the next room. They zip-tied him during his afternoon naps. They zip-tied his hands behind his back and secured his foot to a plastic tote while he slept at night. And why did they have to tie him to a plastic tote? Because the kid was starving and he had the absolute nerve to try to survive. The adults told investigators that Braxtyn would routinely chew through his zip ties in the middle of the night to sneak into the kitchen and grab a candy bar. To prevent this egregious theft of household snacks, his parents resorted to zip-tying the boy directly to their own bodies overnight. Think about the level of psychological sickness required to sleep soundly in a bed while your starving child is literally tethered to you by plastic bindings. When Braxtyn couldn't get to the candy, he resorted to eating whatever he could find. The autopsy and hospital records revealed a detail that should turn the stomach of any civilized person. When the boy was brought into the emergency room, his vomit looked and smelled distinctly like pet food. He had been forced to dig through the trash cans and steal from the family dog just to put something in his stomach. When a family friend threw a 4th of July party in 2023, Braxtyn actually managed to tell someone that he wasn't allowed to eat. When confronted, Joshua Smith casually dismissed it, telling the person that Braxtyn didn't actually need the food to survive. I suppose Joshua considered himself an expert on human biology. In the final months of his life, Braxton's bedroom was taken away entirely. He was banished to the living room or the bathroom floor, left to sleep on the hard tiles with nothing but a single blanket.
When you commit a crime this heinous, you'd think the legal strategy would involve a modicum of shame. But this is the modern American justice system, where accountability is treated as a flexible suggestion. In the spring of 2026, the chickens finally came home to roost in Penobscot County Superior Court. The trial was bought and paid for, the jury pools were ready, and then the defense teams pulled out the standard playbook of deflection. Let's start with Joshua. Just days before his trial was set to begin in June 2026, his legal team tried to pivot to a not guilty by reason of insanity plea. It's the ultimate exit ramp for people who want to avoid a state penitentiary. He claimed he needed a brand new forensic evaluation. The judge, thankfully possessing a functioning brain, looked at the timeline and denied the delay. Realizing the game was up, Joshua walked into court 48 hours later and changed his plea to guilty for depraved indifference murder. But he couldn't just take his medicine like a man. When the Assistant Attorney General spent 18 agonizing minutes reading the horrific facts of the discovery into the record, Joshua actually spoke up to defend his honor. He told the judge that the text messages where he explicitly threatened to beat and kill his son were simply taken out of context. He actually used the word sarcasm. Think about that. Your text history is filled with messages to the grandmother saying, "I'm going to kill him," because the boy wasn't making enough progress on his homeschool worksheets. And your defense is that you were just deploying a bit of dry, witty humor? "It's not like I was trying to kill him or anything," he muttered. Truly, a comedic mastermind. Meanwhile, Misty LaTourette's lawyer spent months trying to convince the public that the state's case against Grandma was very thin. Her defense argument was a masterclass in dodging personal responsibility. Her lawyer argued that, sure, Grandma bought the zip ties, and yes, Grandma suggested withholding food, but how could she possibly foresee that buying tools for binding a child and telling his parents to starve him would result in his death? It's a total mystery. In the end, rather than face a mandatory minimum of 25 years for murder, Misty took a plea deal for manslaughter the very next day, with her lawyer shamelessly arguing for time served based on the 28 months she already spent in jail. If you want the absolute definitive proof of who Joshua Smith is, you don't look at his text messages or his courtroom excuses. You look at what he did on February 18th, 2024, while his son's body was actively shutting down. When Braxtyn collapsed after being put into a warm shower by his mother, he stopped breathing. By the time emergency services got him to St. Joseph Hospital, he had no pulse. The medical team worked like hell,
managed to jumpstart his heart and immediately transferred him to Northern Light Eastern Maine Medical Center. The doctors knew the brain bleed and the systemic organ failure were terminal. There was no saving him. But the medical staff pulled out every trick in the book to keep Braxtyn technically alive for a few more hours for one specific humane reason. They wanted to give his father enough time to get to the hospital to say goodbye. And where was Joshua Smith during this critical window of time? He wasn't speeding down the highway in tears. He wasn't praying in the waiting room. He took a detour. Joshua decided that before he went to see his dying, tortured son, he needed to stop by a local marijuana shop to pick up some weed.
Priorities, folks. While a 10-year-old boy was taking his final, shallow breaths on a hospital bed surrounded by strangers and scrubs, the man responsible for his existence was standing at a retail counter, checking out cannabis strains. When the pulse was briefly restored earlier that day, the grandmother looked at the monitors and remarked, "He's a liar." The mother chimed in, "He lies all the time." Even at the literal threshold of death, the adults in his life were still treating this child's agony as a behavioral scam.
All three of these individuals are currently sitting in the Penobscot County Jail. Jem Bean and Misty LaTourette managed to leverage our system to plead down to manslaughter, while Joshua faces a maximum sentence of life in prison when his sentencing hits in September. The state might call it a resolution, but let's be honest. No amount of prison time fixes the systemic cultural rot that allows a family unit to completely invert its purpose, turning protection into predation, while the rest of the world is kept a polite distance away by the magic word homeschooling.
Subscribe to this YouTube channel to stay tuned on today's Red Stories. Until next time.